You're about to start watching Piers Morgan in conversation with Andrew Doyle. The first 15 minutes of this are free, but if you want to watch the full thing, subscribe to The Spectator at spectator.co.uk/live.
Series where we bring you closer to the lives of those who shape the politics and ideas of today. For tonight's very special event, please join me in welcoming to the stage your host, the legendary comedian and playwright Andrew Doyle, and our star guest, the sharp-tongued titan of talk shows and author of Woke is Dead, Piers Morgan.
So before we go any further, the last time I was in a theatre like this in Glasgow, a 47-year-old spinster walked on stage. I was a judge on a show called Britain's Got Talent, and she walked on the stage and said, "I'm going to sing a Dream to Dream from Les Miserables." And we all went, "Oh my God." Susan Boyle. She sold 27 million albums. Outsold Lady Gaga and Beyonce. Isn't that amazing? And it all happened here in Glasgow. So I'm looking around for another 47-year-old spinster.
I didn't know you're going to do a warm-up set. That's good.
Well, actually, I'm going to finish that because I was telling you about the back because it was hilarious. So I was doing America's Got Talent too. And when she became this sort of breakout absolute superstar, three things happened to me which were just completely nuts. So the first one, I was doing an interview with George Clooney for CNN with his dad. And in the commercial break, George went, "By the way, how's Susan?" I went, "What?" He went, "I'm doing this movie Up in the Air. All we're doing is playing it on a loop all day long. I dreamed a dream." Next thing, I was doing a chat show called The Tonight Show with a guy called Jay Leno in America, big chat show. Bang on the door of my dressing room. I'm with my manager. And in walks Robin Williams. And do you remember Mrs. Doubtfire? And how similar that was to Susan Boyle. So he came in as Mrs. Doubtfire, and for 10 minutes was just Mrs. Doubtfire meet Susan Boyle. I dreamed a dream. And then the last one, I was doing a documentary on Vegas for ITV, and the owner of Planet Hollywood said, "Demi Moore wants to see you in her hotel suite." I was like, well, this is going to be the culmination of a 30-year pursuit happening right now. And I went in, and unfortunately Ashton Kutcher was with her at the time, and he was out painting on the outside, but she held my hand in the middle of her suite for half an hour crying as she told me how much Susan Boyle meant to her. Isn't that amazing? So it was completely insane, but she was fantastic. Anyway, so thank you, Glasgow.
Well, I just want to say good evening, of course, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. My name is Andrew Doyle, and I'm here. Well, I mean, you already know Piers. Obviously, a broadcaster, journalist. He's currently hosting Piers Morgan Uncensored, which has over 4 million subscribers on YouTube, so it's a fantastic success. And we're here to talk about his fantastic new book, Woke is Dead. I've learned a lot from this. I've agreed with every word, so it's not going to be a combative interview. I didn't know that you've changed your pronouns to hot, hotter, hottest.
I have, and I insist on being called by them as well. So
that's how confusing the culture war is now that adjectives are identifying as pronouns. That's how that's happening.
Well, the weird thing for me with the adjective thing, I had someone on the other day on my show, and she suddenly revealed she was non-binary. And I don't know if we have any non-binary people in tonight, and if we do, I've got no problem. But I did just say to her, by the way, I've always been a bit confused. What is non-binary? And why do you call yourself they, them, when there's only one of you? And what was fascinating was she looked like a rabbit in headlights. She couldn't actually tell me. I said, but we're supposed to call you they, them, but there's one of you, and you don't even know what it means. Why? What is this? And it was like a real moment in time, I felt, for a lot of this woke stuff a lot of it is just kind of nonsense. And yet we all have to go along with it, and we all have to use these ridiculous phrases like they, them for one person. And I just think eventually what's happened with wokeism is that common sense. Hang on, well, wait a minute, that was very spooky. That's like the ghost of woke creeping around the building. What is happening here? Groaning curtains. I just think that what's happened with wokeism, it's met common sense. And common sense is a powerful, powerful weapon. And I think what you're seeing now is, I don't think woke is actually dead yet, but I do think that the vast majority of people are not woke. They actually have common sense, particularly someone like here, Glasgow, straight-talking people, full of common sense, who just think the whole thing is a lot of bullshit.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Well, I sense we're not going to get much dissent tonight. It's
Well,
interesting.
does anybody in here actually identify as woke? Have I got any wokies in tonight? No, I didn't
No,
think
there
so.
we go, you see. No, this is an echo
Are
chamber.
there any wokies in Glasgow? That is a real question.
Oh, definitely. So I saw that interview, actually, and it was interesting because it looked to me as though she'd never had that question before.
Right.
And that's something that's really shifted. But I did want to start by asking you about that because, of course, the last book that I read of yours was Wake Up in 2020. And now you've written this new book, Woke is Dead. A lot has happened so quickly. And just to give an example of this, so on the day that Putin invaded Ukraine, on that very day, the Ministry of Defense put out a tweet talking about their pansexual coffee morning, right? And that was only 2022. Something has shifted incredibly rapidly so that now you're able to write a book of this kind. What is it you think that has happened that's brought this on at such a rapid pace, this societal change?
I think people have just realised that it's actually a very insidious attack on what this country is about. You know, the United Kingdom, Britain, is built on the bedrock of democracy, of freedom of expression, freedom of speech. If you don't have freedom of speech in a country like this, then where do you have it? You know, my grandfather fought in World War II, you know, as a Marine commando to fight for our freedom, to be able to have our right to free speech, to say what we think. But in the last few years, people that have said what they think have been shamed, they've been vilified, they've been cancelled, they've been bullied, they've been fired from their jobs, often for the most tiny transgression that the woke brigade had decided is the worst thing that's ever happened. But in the process, the woke gang have become the very thing they profess to hate most. They've become a bunch of fascists, where actually, if you think about what fascism is, it's a group of people with a narrow worldview who try and bully and shame and cancel and kill, actually, and we started to see some of that as well with the murder of Charlie Kirk in America, someone I knew and interviewed several times, murdered because he was exercising his right to free speech. How can any of this be right? And so, you know, I used to identify happily as a liberal. You know, my natural sensibilities are quite liberal. I'm socially quite liberal. I think you can all do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't scare the children and the animals. Well, within reason. Obviously, looking at some of you, quite clear that question can be quite pertinent. But I do think it's really important that all of you in here should be able to express yourself freely.
Yeah.
That's the point of a democracy. What has changed in the last year, and Donald Trump winning the presidency in America, I think, has been a large part of this, was almost like the world where we've had enough of this crap. Sorry, we're just not going to do this anymore. And we're not going to allow you to bully us into agreeing with these often ridiculous notions. And we're not going to allow you to fire people for saying what they think. And we're going to go back to a world where people can have, you know, passionate debate. You can talk about things in an open and free way, say what you really think, and you're not going to lose your job or be shamed or whatever it may be. I just think we got into a really weird place. And thank God the cavalry is coming. And I hope with my book title, what we're really seeing is the death of woke in real time, and that, like a garden when you get rid of the weeds, it's incumbent on all of us to play whack-a-mole with the woke weeds. When they rear their ugly head, pop them back. We don't want another outbreak of wokeism.
Yeah, you're not saying in the book that it's over, let's forget about it.
No.
You're saying, you're urging a kind of vigilance, I think, you know.
And also, if people on the right, some of them are not impervious to woke behaviour, like cancelling people for opinions or, you know, suppressing their free speech. It can work on both sides. The progressive left have been the worst at this and the most venomous, but I think there's a creeping danger of some people on the right also doing this. None of it's acceptable. You have to have, as a bedrock of democracy, free speech. You've got to start with that. And as Winston Churchill said, it's not about, free speech is not about agreeing with people that agree with you. Of course, we can all do that. It's about tolerating other people's views, even if you find them offensive.
But isn't there a risk that, I mean, at the moment we saw after the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk, thousands and thousands of people celebrating clearly people who don't support freedom of speech, including the president-elect of the Oxford Union.
Well, that was just the most extraordinary thing. So here you have this guy who's coming in to be president of the Oxford Union. It looks like he's now not going to be, but he was coming in as the president-elect. I've done the Oxford Union a few times. It's probably the most preeminent debating society in the world. And they've had everybody there, prime ministers, presidents, world leaders around the world, everyone. And this guy had actually debated back in May with Charlie Kirk in that chamber. Think about that for a moment. And when Charlie Kirk was murdered at a public event at a university campus where he used to go all the time with a moniker of "Prove Me Wrong" outside his little tent, and people would queue up and they would debate with him and try and prove him wrong. He was respectful, he was courteous, he may have views that some people in here wouldn't agree with, but he was very upfront about them, and he would debate and he'd listen to you, and he would hear an alternative view and try and debate his way to a conclusion. This guy, President-elect of the Union, responded to Charlie Kirk and the news that he'd been murdered in front of his wife and 2 young kids by posting LOL, laugh out loud. He found it hilarious. And then "here we effing go," exclamation mark, jubilant, absolutely jubilant, that a guy he literally stood across a debating desk from 3-4 months earlier had been murdered for his free speech. And this guy wanted to run the Oxford Union? Now people say, well, hang on, Piers. If you say he shouldn't get that job, aren't you part of the cancel culture you hate? No, free speech doesn't come without accountability. If you want to be president of a speaking, debating society, and you think it's fine that people get murdered for their speech, you are not conducive to that role. That's not cancel culture. That is a cold, hard reality check. And there's a difference. You can't say anything, and even in America, which has the best defense of free speech, the First Amendment, probably of anywhere in the world. Even there, you can't run into a theatre like this and shout fire if it causes a stampede because there isn't a fire and people die. You can't do it. You're not protected. You can't do other things that are not protected. So everything has limitations. But I think what's happened in the last few years, people have tried to add everything as an extra limitation. We can almost not say anything. And people wander around like treading on eggshells thinking, can I say this? Can I say that? It's ridiculous. We're British people. When did this happen? How do we let this happen? Don't let it happen again, people.
So do you think, the example you've just given is quite chilling, isn't it? He's a young man celebrating someone else's death because he disagrees with him politically. And I think we've seen a lot of that. Do you think there's a level in which, it can't be that there's just suddenly a new generation of sociopaths out there. Isn't it that wokeness, or maybe the rise of wokeness, has created not just an echo chamber or a bubble, but something in which you see anyone outside of the chamber as being less than human?
Well, the social media is a real problem, and I think young people have it much worse, I think, in that regard than I ever did. When I was a young kid in East Sussex, you got a very sanitized view of things like war, for example. You only got what the 2 or 3 news networks wanted to show you in a half-hour bulletin each night. There weren't hundreds of channels like there are now with rolling news. The newspapers were quite sanitized. You didn't have social media. Anyone who's on X these days or Instagram knows what I'm talking about with the imagery from Gaza, from Ukraine. It's horrific and it's relentless. Now, we're mostly adult people, right? I'm 60 and I'm used to this. I've been in the news game a long time. Even it can affect. What's it doing to a 15, 16-year-old to be exposed to that all the time? I think that's really damaging, and I think we've got to be very careful about what we expose them to because it's constant negative dopamine.
Yeah.
And it's going to have a really bad effect on people. Then there's the peer pressure. I remember in the middle of the George Floyd thing, which I was on Good Morning Britain, and I was doing a lot of coverage of this. I thought it was one of the most despicable things I'd ever watched, that video. A horrific murder of this guy. But there became a really weird outbreak of what I would call kind of pointless virtue signaling, culminating in the Black Square Day, which some of you may remember when everyone on Instagram had to devote their grid to a black square. And I said to my sons, why? What's that going to achieve? Well, everyone's doing it, Dad. Yeah, I know everyone's doing it, but what does it achieve? I'm actually campaigning on my show to get things actually changed, right, to stop this happening again. What does this help? Next day, everyone's going to go back to doing pictures of themselves in bikinis on beaches. How does that help? How does that help racial equality or anything, right? And my sons were like, yeah, Dad, just do it. I said, no, you don't have to just do it. Well, actually, I forgot all about it. I went down to my local park. I had a bottle of wine with me. I just didn't think. I posted a picture of my bottle of wine. And my kids all contacted me within a few minutes because they were getting bombarded by their friendship group saying your dad's lost his mind. He's gone mad. He's posted a picture of a bottle of wine, not a black square. And I said, guys, listen to yourselves. This is madness.
Yeah.
I can do what I want. It's my Instagram. I don't feel that pressure. Why do you? And then we talked it all through, and actually they all realized I was right? This was clearly ridiculous. And the next day, everybody went back to their normal Instagram. That kind of virtue signaling gets nowhere about anything.
But on the other hand, Piers, like during that woke era, there were real consequences for a lot of people to not play along. I mean, I think of an actress friend of mine who told me during that era, her agent phoned her up and said, why haven't you posted the black square? And if you don't, I won't be able to get you any roles.
Right.
So that's an actual, not, you know. And
but how, listen, I mean, people are laughing. This was actually happening. This was completely insane, wasn't it? That someone could actually lose acting roles for not posting a black square on their Instagram page. What have we allowed to happen? So I do think this is a great moment now where common sense is prevailing. But don't be under any illusion. There are still a lot of people out there that will want to pressurize people into conforming to that worldview.
Yes.
And that worldview is a really insidious and damaging one.
so what are the main signs that woke is, if not dead, then dying? I know that you open the book with a prologue about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's a key figure in all of this, isn't he?
Well, I've had some great time. I've known Donald Trump 20 years since he chose me as his celebrity apprentice. And in fact, in the final, the live finale in New York, he said, Piers, you're arrogant, you're obnoxious, you're possibly evil, I don't know, but he said, but you beat the hell out of everybody and you're my celebrity apprentice. And everyone went mad. I was like, great, thank you, Donald. And when he became president in 2016, I sent him a note. Dear Donald, I said, you're arrogant, you're obnoxious, you're possibly evil, I don't know, but you beat the hell out of everybody and you're the president of the United States, which he thought was hilarious. But yeah, I mean, Trump's a really interesting kind of part of all this because he's about as anti-woke as a human being has ever been in the history of planet Earth. But when he stepped up in the campaign and said, you know what, under me, if you're a biological man, you're not going to compete in women's sport. And that's not being transphobic. That is protecting women's rights. I have nothing against trans people. I want trans people to have the same rights as me, to fairness, equality, to safety, but not at the expense of women's rights. People will look back in 20 years' time, maybe sooner actually, and say we lost our minds about this particular issue. Right? The idea, and there was a classic example of a swimmer called Leah Thomas in America, 6'4", incredibly powerful, former male swimmer, pretty unsuccessful, suddenly saying, I'm a woman, getting in the pool against women, including a woman called Riley Gaines, who's been really brave about this issue, and destroying them in the pool and breaking women's records, which might never be broken, winning one long race by 50 seconds. And we've all just stood back and watched this happen. And I've got a daughter of nearly 14 thinking, I'm not having her, if she wants to compete in sport, how can she compete against a 6'4" biological man? There's a real, I mean, you won't believe how nutty this gets. Last week on my show Uncensored, I interviewed a woman who wants to be the governor of California called Betty Yee. Never met her, don't know her, was just told she's one of the candidates to be governor of California. I have a home in LA, so half the time I'm a Californian, right? So I had a vested interest. And we got round to this subject, and I said, what do you feel about the trans issue? And she said, well, I think that they should be allowed to be treated as women. I went, okay, but what about in sport? She said, yeah, in sport. I said, okay, well, you've got the Olympics coming to LA in 2028. What are you going to do with the Olympics? If you're the governor, will you be advocating for a gender-neutral Olympics, for example? Yes, she said. I said, what? A gender-neutral Olympics? I said, do you realize why we separate the sexes to start with? Because women wouldn't win more than about 2 gold medals. I think someone calculated that once.
Yeah.
So there's like two of the entire Olympic sports where a woman could compete on the same level as a man because it wouldn't involve actual physical power, lung capacity, body mass, and so on. And that is not, as some people try and make out, to denigrate women athletes. It's just to offer a biological reality, a scientific reality. Men are generally built taller, more powerful, stronger, bigger lung capacity, and so on. They have a natural physical advantage over women at sport. That's why we separate the sexes. A gender-neutral Olympics would kill women's sport completely.
So you're saying stuff that I think everyone knows and everyone instinctively
But this woman
knows.
wants to be the governor of California.
Right.
So, I mean, it's completely insane. And she said it with completely straight
But she's not
she was deadly serious.
She's not alone. I mean, you had Zach Polanski on from the Green Party the other day, who still thinks that a woman can have a penis.
I literally said to him, just to be clear, I know, and in 20 years' time they'll go, was this a real question? Right? Can a woman have a penis? Now, does anybody in this room think a woman can have a penis? No. And right, and this guy Polanski, Zach Polanski goes, Piers, you're being very transphobic. You hate trans people. I said, I don't hate trans people. I couldn't be clearer about that. But women don't have a penis. Check. Have a look.
But why do they struggle with... I mean, it's interesting because you quote in your book about when Keir Starmer was asked and how at first he just... Oh, there we go.
Well, he went from saying that trans women are women, then he went to eventually saying only that 99.9% of women don't have a penis. And I said, well, who are the other 0.1%?
Yeah.
Who are these women?
Well, I did the maths on that. That's actually 35,000 female penises in the UK, which is a lot of female penises. If you just try and picture that.
It is just bloody ridiculous, isn't it?
But
and yet we've allowed this. Well, we haven't allowed it. People have felt too scared to talk about it. I had some very famous female friends of mine, actresses and so on, who came on my show, who, when I said, what is a woman, refused to answer the question because they didn't want to have the backlash from the trans activists. How awful is that?
But do you think that's why there's such a crisis of confidence in politicians? Because when someone like
it's why someone like Donald Trump does so well.
Quite.
Right, when you compare Donald Trump to Keir Starmer, whatever side of the political divide you're on, one just seems to be an absolute straight shooter, right, just spews whatever comes out of his head at any given moment. But there's something kind of weirdly I like it. You know, apparently the journalists on Air Force One, they can never sleep because at any moment he might appear. and he pops his head out and goes, okay, let's talk about Ukraine. And they're like, whoa. I was only half an hour in my sleep, Mr. President. And they never get any sleep. But he's nearly 80. He has incredible energy. He's never had a drink in his life, never had a cigarette, never had a drug. And he will say in real time what he's thinking, right? And he's a transactional guy. He's a deal maker. This is his whole thing. He did a book called The Art of a Deal. Everything in there is really his playbook as president. But there's a kind of refreshing authenticity to Trump. Good, bad, and ugly. You know, he is what he is. He doesn't try and pretend to be anything he's not. And he will say what he's thinking in real time. I like it. I don't agree with him about a lot of things, but I do agree with him about a lot of things. And last week I watched him get those hostages released in Gaza, and I thought, wow, would anybody else have enabled that to happen? Nobody else was coming close to that happening. And does he get enough credit for that? Not really. Not really. You still have the hysteria about Trump where people say he's the new Hitler. Well, last time I checked, Adolf Hitler didn't work that hard to release Jewish people.
Yeah.
Last time I checked. So it's probably quite an offensive term.
So that's really interesting because you've also mentioned in the book that during the campaign when MSNBC were covering Donald Trump and the rally at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
And they interspersed it with footage from actual Nazis.
Well, they were talking about a rally at Madison Square Garden in the 30s leading up to World War II, which they branded a Nazi rally, and it had a lot of very Nazi, hateful rhetoric spewed at it. But they were making the point that clearly Trump's was going to be the same. He had Holocaust survivors in the front row of his rally. It was the first rally I've ever been to, political rally. Trump, I spoke to him in the morning, he said, "Can you come down?" I went, sure. I went down, and I knew he won the election the week before because there were no protests outside in the middle of New York. They'd just given up. The resistance had given up. And it was like a kind of rock concert. You know, people coming out and doing their thing, and real confidence, everything else. But you know, his son-in-law is Jewish, Jared. His daughter's converted to Judaism. He had Holocaust survivors in the front row. This Nazi thing is so disgusting if you think about it. You know, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis killed 12 million people. They waged a Holocaust against 6 million Jews. Right? The idea that this is what Donald Trump is pursuing as a world leader is ridiculous and offensive. And you don't have to even like him to understand how ridiculous and offensive that is.
So, I mean, you're very pro-free speech, as you've made very, very clear. Is there a case to be made that when this word fascist is bandied around inaccurately and promiscuously, as well as Nazi, it kind of generates a kind of culture within which people will take up arms and shoot those who have been told?
Why wouldn't they?
Right.
Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't the shooter of Charlie Kirk, whose bullet casings, in some cases of the bullets, were found with anti-fascism slogans on it, why would a deranged young mind who's hearing all day long that Charlie Kirk is a fascist and a Nazi and knew Hitler, as everyone on the conservative right in America is branded these days, why wouldn't he think he's doing the world a favor by killing this person?
So should there be greater consequences for the misuse of that term?
Just stop using the term when people are clearly not Nazis. It's not difficult, right? The Nazis were the worst genocidal monsters of the last 100 years. Right? The idea that that's Donald Trump is just so ridiculously untrue and offensive.
Well, it's another...
I just think that people just stop doing it. Imagine being a Holocaust survivor and hearing this. Right? About how you must feel.
But it's become a tool, hasn't it? Because if you call someone a Nazi, you're effectively saying you're disobliging yourself from engaging with them because they're subhuman, they're lower than the lower.
Why would you have anything to do with a Nazi? Right?
But it feels like that's impossible to solve now, because anyone who denies that there are two sexes is called a fascist. People like J.K. Rowling are called a fascist.
Well, you just have to ignore it. And employers and companies who have the power a lot of the time over employment, for example, they have to ignore it. And they have to stop pursuing this kind of ridiculous narrative and stop responding to it and stop panicking about the woke mob coming for you, because they come as a mob and they try. I mean, look, I had it a bit with what I call the Markle debacle on Good Morning Britain. Is Meghan in tonight? Or, no.
She's watching the live stream, I bet. She's a big fan.
I did hear a hilarious story that when Donald Trump was here for the state visit recently, his opening line to Queen Camilla was, "Have you seen Meghan recently?" So that did make me laugh. But if you remember, I mean, that day she was spewing all this bullshit to Oprah Winfrey with Harry sitting there like a little doormat. And I just thought, none of this is true, right? It just didn't ring true, right? The royal family are a bunch of racists. Really? The ones I met could not be further from that. And then it turned out they were talking about Charles and Catherine, right? Really? Obviously completely insane. Then they said, if you remember, that the Archbishop of Canterbury secretly married them 3 days before the actual televised wedding. If he had done that, it was a criminal offence. He would have gone to jail. The Archbishop of Canterbury would have been imprisoned if he'd done this. So I just thought, well, a lot of this is obviously just nonsense. But it doesn't matter whether I thought that or not, or whether I believe that or not. I'm allowed to disbelieve it. I can disbelieve anyone in this room about anything, right? And you might be telling the truth. It's fine. I don't have to believe you. Or I can believe you. Everybody else on that show that day believed what Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were saying. I didn't. Why was their right to believe it considered to be more acceptable than my right to disbelieve it? Why was I then ordered to apologize for saying that I didn't believe somebody who it turned out had been telling a pack of porcupines anyway? Right? The whole thing was crazy. And then why would a media company like ITV, which I look a lot of time for ITV, we spent a lot of time there, I still get on with a lot of the top people there, but why would ITV not understand what free speech is? Why did it take Ofcom, the TV regulator, 6 months later with their report to be the ones who rejected there were 57,000 complaints, the highest in the history of Ofcom.
Do I detect a bit of pride?
Well,
there?
only because 57,000 got rejected. Hey! And they all got rejected. So I hold two records, most complaints and most complaints rejected. But they said at the end, it would have been a chilling infringement on my free speech rights not to be able to say what I said. Well, of course. But why would a media company not know that?
Were you surprised that they reacted in the way they
did?
I
was only annoyed when I found out Meghan Markle had written to the female boss of ITV, and the letter apparently demanding she fire me. And the letter began, "I write to you as a woman and as a mother."
Wow.
Oh, dear. And I might add a piece of work.
Well, I saw that in exchange you had with your colleague on Good Morning Britain, and you were saying there were demonstrable falsehoods and things she'd said.
Yeah.
And he was saying, but it's her lived experience.
Yeah, I mean, this whole lived experience, my truth bullshit. Sorry. Just to be clear, you don't all have your own truth. You might want to. I can think of a few times in my life when it would have been very handy for me to say, actually, well, my truth is that I didn't do that. So I know what it looks like, but no. It's just nonsense, isn't it? What does my truth mean? My lived experience means it may not be true, but if I've lived it and it's my truth, it's true. It's a fact. Well, no. A fact is a fact. A fact is something that's actually happened. It's an actual truth. The moment we all start talking about my truth, imagine how complicated that gets. It means in this room there'd be hundreds and hundreds of different versions of a truth. Right? I could say my name is Piers Morgan, and 300, 400 people would go, no, it's not, it's John. And they were like, no, it's not. You go, that's my truth. I've decided your name's John, and you have to respect it. No, I don't. It's complete bullshit. So, again, we're going to look back and I think look at these period of my truth and think, what a load of nonsense.
Do you think you'll reconcile with Meghan?
No.
No, fair enough.
I think there are two hopes of that happening. No Hope and Bob Hope. And Bob Hope's been dead about 25 years.
And how are things with Trump, though? I mean, you mentioned in the prologue this frosty interview.
Well, so when I launched my new show, I'd been very critical of Trump in the last year of his last presidency, over particularly when he said you should inject yourself with bleach to cure COVID. And I'd said, I think I wrote a column for the Daily Mail saying, Mr. President, please shut up with these batshit crazy theories or people are going to die. And the next day, he did the worst imaginable thing to me. He unfollowed me on Twitter. And he only followed about 50 accounts, half of which were his companies, most of the rest of which were his kids and his family. I was the only British person who he followed. So this became a huge story. Trump unfollows me. I took it very badly, I have to say. I locked myself away in my Twitter dungeon for about 2 weeks, weeping. But then about 6 months later, he just rang me out of the blue, as he does, Trump, you know. Piers, are we good? Are we good? I went, we're good, Mr. President. Great to hear from you. And then I did this interview with him. And this is what happened. So I go down to Mar-a-Lago, his amazing palatial home. I've got a crew of about 6 or 7. We've spent six-figure sum to get the best cameras, the best lighting, the best everything. And Trump's agreed to give me about 35, 40-minute interview at max. So actually, maybe even less, maybe like 20 minutes. But it was worth it to launch the show. And I was quite surprised because I thought, wow, okay, he's taken it well. The criticism of, especially over January 6th, the riots and the stolen election, which I didn't believe was stolen. Well, finally, he's learned how to take criticism. Great. Big mistake. So what happened was, 10 minutes before I was due to start the interview, I was all suited, booted, made up, all ready to go, Secret Service, chatting all happily to me. Piers, great to meet you, how are things? You know, really nice vibe in the room. And then this guy with an ashen face who'd been like the fixer for me with the interview came to me, clutching 3 bits of paper. And he said, we've got a big problem. I went, what is it? He went, this. So I looked at it and quickly realized it was 3 pages of the worst things I had written and said about Trump in the previous 12 months. I was like, what is this? He went, someone's just sent this to the boss from London. I went, from London? I said, who? He went, I don't know. And then I thought, hang on. Who was down here 2 days ago? I checked the Twitter feed of the suspect, and there was Nigel Farage. Yeah, oh yes, the treacherous little worm.
That's it, our 15 minutes is up, but if you want to keep watching Piers and Andrew, including the Q&A at the end, then simply go to spectator.co.uk/live and subscribe right now. For just £3 for 3 months, you can access all our live streams, daily commentary, podcasts and video content, including the rest of Piers and Andrew.